I'm going to go ahead and record this also for internal uses, so this won't be available to clients, just so you know. The appeal module isn't used by many, and at this point it's actually a paid add-on, so I predict it will get even less use now, but we'll just see. It is pretty darn cool though. So it's going to be kind of up to us to kind of turn that around. Um, so basically what the appeal module is it allows you to select segments from your database and basically say who these segments are and what letter they're going to get, and then get files of who they are so that you can send that to a mailing house or to a mail merge. That's a terrible description, but we'll run with it. So what a lot of people do with reports is they will pull a report for one segment and send that to a mailing house, and then pull another report for another segment and send that to the mailing house. And what happens is if these are different segments of the same mailing, the reports might overlap. And so it's really hard to keep people from being in one that shouldn't be in it because they're in the other, and so on and so forth. Terry, you probably know what I'm talking about from probably personal experience. Um, so what the
I
appeals
do.
module lets you do is say, I have this appeal. These are the people who could be in it. And of the people who could be in it, these people are going to be in this, segment 1, segment 2, segment 3, segment 4, segment whatever. And these are the people that theoretically could be in my appeal, but I don't want them to be. So we can also do suppressions. And then we can do what's called packages, which is basically the letter itself. And then we can say, what percentage of each segment is getting which package. So a lot of times it's 1-to-1. Segment A gets package A. Segment B gets package B, and so on. But sometimes you'll have, half of A is going to get, A1 and the other is going to get A2. So we can do some interesting things. And then you'll get files when it's all done. There is a fair amount of configuration involved, and I have to admit there's even pieces of the appeal module that I don't understand. So for internal purposes, do know that the heaviest user of the appeal module is our Innover clients, who we don't directly actually work with. They're actually supported through Innover itself, so we don't see them. But that's basically where the appeal module came from. We're talking about organizations like a million records, and so it's built to work on that scale. For organizations that are running with maybe like 100 clients, 1,000 clients, 10,000 maybe at the highest, and they're not doing complex appeals, reports in advanced search can probably fit their need. But with that said, let's talk about appeals. So if we're going to start, we're going to start with configurations, because there's a fair number of things that we're going to need. And now my definition for some of these is going to be kind of poor, because they were only explained to me once and I don't actually understand what they do. But we're going to start under appeals with output templates, scan lines, seeds, transcodes, and report groups. So I'm going to start with report groups because that's the easiest one and it's the newest one. It just showed up recently. I have no idea what it does. I'll be completely honest. I have no idea what it does. It showed up recently. It's used specifically, I think, for Innover clients. So for the purpose of our clients, for report groups, then just put a code of 1 and maybe a name of default and add, and that's probably all you need to do. Now eventually we should probably go to the team and get a definition for report groups, but for the time being, I don't have one. So with a lot of their configurations for appeals for our clients' purposes, they just need to kind of set it and forget it. They aren't going to probably be using the piece that we're configuring, but it is going to need to be present. So that's report groups. The next one is transcodes. So these are used to help distinguish. Well, here, let me give you an example. You may have at some point gotten a appeal or something maybe from your from a bank or something where you had to return a check with a form, and you may have noticed that on the form there's actually a barcode on it. So what actually that lets them do is when they get the check, they can simply scan the barcode and enter the amount, and it will automatically connect to you for that billing cycle. And that's basically what transcodes and scan lines are. So what transcodes are, they're going to be used in the scan codes, but they're basically selling, in a alphanumeric kind of just barcodey way, the appeal segment, some filler, and what package. a given piece of correspondence corresponds to. So this is another one of the cases that most of our clients probably won't be using this because it's used for caging facilities and things like that. But basically, so they're just going to need something just to be a filler in here. In my case, I go appeal segment filler, so just 2 random zeros and package. We'll see where these values actually will come from, the appeal code, the segment code, the package code, and what have you. We can add in a few other things that we're not going to worry about. So once you add that in, we're good there. And then we have scan lines. And this is the actual barcode. So the TRAN code just identifies the appeal segment package. The scan line itself will be what would be turned into a barcode, which I'm waiting for it to load. Did I click? There we go. So I'll edit one here. So what we have here is the account ID, the client ID, and the transcode. So the transcode we saw where that's pulled from. Client is going to actually be the client ID for the organization. You see it sometimes like on pages. I think that the client ID of Monte Cristo is 10. And then account ID, I think, corresponds to the contact ID of the contact. So basically, when you put all this together, if you were to scan this code, it was going to tell you not only what appeal, but who's paying, who's making the donation into that appeal. So once again, this is another one of those set it and forget it configurations. So if you ever do a training, set this up for them. Let them know that it just needs to be selected and move on with life.
This terminology, did this come from Innovair or are these commonly
Yes,
accepted?
It came from Innovair,
Okay.
which, considering that Innovair, at least at the last I heard, makes up like a large portion of the total U.S. Physical mail appeals out there, I think we can trust them. But in
I
fact,
was just wondering if like, organizations who actually do this kind of stuff, if they know what a scan line and a transcode is, or if this was just like some jargony weird thing that
the
either Innovair
ones,
came up with or we came up with.
my understanding is those that work with caging facilities will know what this is. Most of our clients at this time don't work with caging facilities, so this will be Latin to them, just like it is honestly to me. So if they do work with caging facilities, they should know. If they do say, well, what is it? Just kind of give them, it's used for making scan line for barcodes, basically, with caging facilities. Ask them if they're working with a caging facility. They're probably going to say no. And then just say, we just have to have it for our purposes. And then, if you really do need a definition, then maybe we can check with the team for a better definition than what I've got.
Okay.
So that's scan lines, tran codes, report group. Output templates, however, are something we know. We understand what these are. This is basically what columns are we going to have in the Excel file when it's done. So you might need different column headers for different segments or something, depending on what you're up to. Or you might have just one generic template. So where's mine? Here's mine. So file format, and then your column headers. So prefix, first name, last name, contact ID, address, city, state, zip, postal, the tran code, the scan line, the recency. You probably wouldn't need these things, but you can drop in other things like custom field data, anything you might want, honestly, for doing a mail merge, which is basically what the caging facility, what the mailing house is going to be doing. So we can pull a lot of stuff. Most of it you won't need, but these are going to be important because they're going to tell us, the caging facility what barcode to use. So this is a generic one. Most organizations can get by with something similar to this. Any questions? Okay. And then seeds, and then we'll move into another piece that we're going to need. These, I kind of feel a little redundant. Like, why don't we just pull from the system? But whatever. These are basically your QA people. So when you send it out to your constituencies, you can put these people, but you can also, as you can see, group together and make sure that they're getting a copy of the appeal. So these are usually going to be staff members. I guess theoretically not people who are in your database, so that's why we don't just pull from people in the database. Add new contact, and just put in their mailing information. And it treats them as if they were a legitimate part of any segment that you add them to. So we'll see them in a little bit later. All right, so the last configuration is not there, is ask arrays. Oops. Curse you, there we go. Is ask arrays. So ask arrays will actually get pulled automatically and added to the segment. And we're going to use them in appeals to say what we're going to ask for. So we've already used them in places like fundraising pages. But ask arrays were originally built for the appeal module. And then we just kind of moved, then we happened to say, hey, this is a good idea, we used them elsewhere. So when we create our ask arrays, which we've covered in other trainings, so I'm not going to cover right now, this is where we're saying what we're going to ask for. So this is where code and culture and acquisition come into play. We'll actually see where that comes into play. And then our ask array details. And this is really where calculated comes in, because everybody in this database, theoretically, we have information for. So this is where the calculated has the most power. Because if we're doing a mailing to existing donors, we're going to be able to pull their history, and in the letter we send them, give them the values in our ask array. Or we can do fixed. So this works exactly like we would in pages, which is, for time purposes, I'm going to skip for now. But I do have a tutorial on this, I think, somewhere. So this is the other thing that you'll need. One thing I do want to mention is we're going to see it very soon, but the amount groups, frequency groups, and recency groups also come into play for appeals. So generally speaking, nobody uses these, but Innovair does use them quite heavily for segmenting up their database. So amount groups are basically what, who falls into what ranges, frequency groups, how often have they given, and recency groups, how recently have they given. So, any questions?
Nope.
Okay. Yeah, so let's get into the fun part, if you can call it fun. The appeals themselves. So now we can create appeals, and I should have enough different ones at different stages that we should be able to kind of paint the picture of how these work. Oh, yes. Okay, sorry, I had talked to Cecilia first. Oh, I unpaused. There we go. Okay, so let's create a new appeal. So, new appeal, and we have lots of options. So we can do mailing appeals, and we can do email appeals. And the email appeals are kind of like newsletters. They will send from the system. Mailing appeals will give you files for downloading and pushing forward. So appeal code. This is based on the organization. It gets pulled into our TRAN code and scan line and is a unique identifier for the appeal. So this is where we could do something like, let's do a summer appeal. So we might call it Sum 2016 as a unique identifier. Appeal name, Summer Appeal 2016. Appeal type, retention, acquisition, other. If an ask array is set, has the acquisition check marked, it can only be used with the ACQ, acquire option. So be aware of that. Retention for pulling out new, on bringing in new. If you ever help Innovair, they may have more options than this. They do things kind of oddly. So let's call this one a retention one. What is the fund that donations for this appeal will be recorded against? Where's my general? There it is. The default source, so mail. What campaign will this be linked to? I don't have one, so whatever. When is it planned to be mailed? So let's say August 31st. What program? recency frequency. I forget what the C stands for. So this is. I actually don't know. I'm gonna be honest. I actually don't remember what that does. Estimated revenue per 1,000 people that you send to. What scan line you're going to use. Is this a force appeal, which is strange. Innover uses these to basically, instead of doing segments and actually doing what we're about to do, they've done their segmenting somewhere else and they're just going to force people in as they need them. Premium rules, which we have not talked about today, I don't believe, but are basically the thank you gift. And then report group, which this is the only place report group I think actually comes into play. And then what templates are we going to use? Our output file methodology, so combine the package code plus the segment code, and the transcode methodology, so what transcode are we using? So a lot of this, you just need to set something and not care too much about it for our client's purposes. Save and proceed. And then now we make our segments. So we start with the universe. This is the widest possible net we could throw, which will include all possible recipients and could potentially include some people we don't want, but we would need to exclude through specific criteria. So we want all donors in the system. That's our universe. But later on, we might find that we're breaking up those donors into major, minor, and excluding volunteers. So we'll talk about those examples. So universe is our widest possible net. Segment name, probably something like universe. Estimated revenue per 1,000, if you're going to put that. It's a universe, default, report group, and now we go ahead and we select. So this is where we can use categories, recency, frequency, amount, and RFA sources, as well as search criteria. So I could say, you know what, everybody with the contact type in donors. So that's going to pull every donor in the system. That's our universe segment. Save and add new segment. Now, let's say, okay, before we get into which donors we want, let's say which donors we don't want. We don't want volunteers who happen to also be donors. So we're going to play with what's called a, suppression segment. And this basically means anyone that fits into this group will be dropped. So segment code, let's call it S1 for suppression. And we call this volunteers and all that. And so now anybody who also who's among the universe with contact type in volunteer, which actually in this system should be 0. That's our suppression segment. And so you may be noticing over here we have a priority. So what this is basically going to be doing is saying, put everybody into this segment. Now the universe just passes it down. And then anybody in this segment, put in that segment. Anyone that remains, drop into the next one. Anyone that catches, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of like, if you've ever seen those, they used them here in California back in the day for panning for gold. You dump a bunch of gravel and junk in the top, and each layer would be a subsequently more fine mesh. So the top layer would stop the big rocks, and the next layer would get smaller and smaller and smaller. And each time you have less and less stuff going through. Kind of the same idea. You're dumping everything in the top, and then each layer is filtering out who you want on that layer. So from here, I might, for example, create the major donor. Oops. So D1, major, wait, what did I do here? There's the button I want. So D1, major donors, and whatever, I'm happy with all that. And this is going to grab everybody with who's in the platinum, niobium, and can we get rid of that? The hello group. Somebody, if you could be so kind as to delete that amount group, please. So what this is going to do is it's going to catch anybody in these two groups, save and add new segment, and then my next segment I would use to grab, say, everybody else. So this is the minor donors. I keep doing this. D2, minor. minor donors. Sorry, my minor looked right for some bizarre reason. Well, I know why, but anyway. So it's going to catch these donors, and so on and so forth. And then theoretically, that should catch everybody. But what I could always do is put a final segment to catch anyone left, or I could not. If they don't fall into one of these, we just drop them, so they just fall
I
back
thought
into the
this
river.
I thought this was a funnel though. So I thought this was like an and. So you take the universe, and of the universe you take out the volunteers, and then you're including the major donors, but at that point, when you set the major donors, you've excluded the minor donors.
Yeah. So how it's I don't like the funnel example because it's more there's a filtering process as we go through, which is why I like using the old panning machine example, which no one ever really, which I wish I had a picture of. Because what it's doing is it's the universe is you dumping everybody into the that panning machine, and then it's going to
Mm-hmm.
grab the volunteers. Now the volunteers have been removed from whatever is continuing to fall through, and then the major
Right.
donors are grabbed. Now no volunteer can fall through to major donors because they're already snagged.
Right.
So then whoever's snagged in major donors can't be passed through to minor donors. And then whoever minor donors snags can't be passed on further. And if I don't put a segment that could catch anyone left, they'd simply get dropped and fall back into the river.
I'm still slightly confused because I feel like I thought each of these was a subset of the previous,
No,
unless the previous is an exclusion.
it's
But
an exclusion. So think of this not as a series of reports building on each other. Each one is separate. It's running itself from whoever is left up here. So what we're basically doing is we're taking a group of volunteers, running this search, removing those people from from our original results, and passing what's left over down to the next one. That's priority.
right. So, but if in this example, so let's say the universe is you, me, and Michael, and Michael's a volunteer. So
Yes.
now Michael's out. So you and I
Michael's
are
out.
left.
Yes.
And let's say you gave $1,000 and I gave $5. So that major donor means you're in and I'm out, right?
Yep. And then you dropped, and then if you happen to be caught by minor donor, that's where you go.
But I'd
You
already
keep
be out.
no, you keep dropping. You're
You
not
keep
out
dropping.
because you're not a suppression group.
Yeah. So what happens is suppression says anyone who meets these criteria, toss them out entirely. Then
Mm-hmm.
drop into the next, and then whatever's left, whatever rocks you got left, drop into the next filter. And whoever's caught by that one stays there. Whoever's not caught by that one drops down into the next filter.
Oh,
That's why I
okay.
like using the gold machine, whatever it's called. I wish I
Right.
knew the name. Because it's not that you have to meet everything above you. It's that each layer is pulling more and more people out until eventually you get down to you have almost no one left. So it's a filter. It's just a series
But
of
then what are we
filters.
doing with these segments?
That's what we're going to play with next. So we have more coming. We just don't see it
Oh,
yet.
okay.
So once we make our segments, how we're going to break these people up, which is mostly for reporting purposes, to be honest, we are going to do what's called the select phase. So we hit select, and it passes it to the system to basically run the searches. So after a while, I will get an email saying that the selection is complete. So if I go into this, I now will find, that I have results. Now, I'm not saying this is a well put together one, and so I can now pass on to my packages. So my packages are the actual letters. So it might be that I'm using the segments only as a means to break it up for reporting, but all segments are getting the same letter, which is weird, but that's actually what they do a lot. They use segments as more of a reporting tool than a distinguishment of who's getting what letters. So I could just have a single package, let's call it 1, that's called the general ask letter that will be delivered on the 31st. And of my 22 individuals, all of them will get that one. But then maybe I'm not going to do it that way. So I'm going to ignore orgs because apparently nobody showed up for that. much like certain webinars. So maybe I have another package, which is our experimental letter. So maybe on this letter, we're trying something different. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to say, of these 22 individuals, what number of them randomly assigned will get the general ask, and which of them will get the experimental ask. So maybe I'm going to give 15 people will get the general, and 7 will get the experimental, bringing us to 22. So maybe these guys are getting, we just want to see, does this do better? But we aren't willing to commit to a 50-50 split or something like that. Sometimes known as A/B testing. So this is where things can get really funky. Other cases you might say, you know what, I'm going to have all individuals get the individual letter and all organizations get the organization letter. And this could be an org letter instead. Or, so I mean, you just have to tell it how to distribute. So these are your letters, and this is how you're distributing your segments across those letters. And it could be a 1-to-1 ratio, or you might split your segment across multiple packages, multiple letters to see what happens. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So at this point, we save and proceed. I missed something. There it is.
Transcode.
Thank you. And what we actually do is say what we're going to do with our output. So here we have 1 individuals. And what this basically saying is that you have the hold on, I'm trying to remind myself how this works. Okay, so the 1 is actually the package. So we have output file methodology is package code plus segment code from step 2, excuse me. So this is basically saying package 1, individuals, package 2, individual segment. And notice the numbers are being pulled from what we did here. So this package output file is called 1 individuals, file name, excuse me, file code, file name. We can tag it. The ask array we're going to use, output file template, culture, seed group, so staff and cool people, and then template for this particular package segment combo. And then save, because we're just going to run with the defaults for that. And then do that again here. Which ask array, which output file, they don't have to be the same, they don't have to be different, but only staff this time, and save. So now we've told the system how we want to break people up into segments, what letters we have and who's going to get them, and then the final details about the letter itself. And we're ready to do what's called the QC, which I have no idea what that stands for. Quality control, there it was. Because at this point, we're going to review our files before we approve them. So we'd go QC, and it's going to process on the back end, make the files, and send us the files once it's done. Any questions on output?
Nope.
Okay, so let's see, at this point, let's go back to appeals and see if I can find an appeal that is of the, okay, so we're going to email that it's done, let's edit it. No, I'm a step behind. QC in progress, that's the one I want. So what this means is, really? Why? It should be giving me the option to download the files. I'm not sure why it's not. But at which point we would download the files and then approve them. So once we reviewed our files, we'd click that output approved. We'd have our files, we'd send them to the mailing house, and this would now be an approved appeal, and we can now add GIFs for this appeal as they come in. Which, if you ever wonder what that's for.
Does that add gift for appeal that option doesn't show up, I'm assuming, if people are not paying for appeals.
I'd imagine that'd be true, yes. But I don't know what they just put in the changes, so.
Right. All right, we'll have to keep an eye on that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm very sad. I was actually playing with this a lot right before I left LCW, and we were super excited about this. We didn't quite understand how it worked, but we understood the general gist of it.
Mhm.
And so when I heard like it's paid add-on that's basically double the price of your CRM, I was so sad because I was like, oh, we were so excited. This is such a cool thing.
Gotcha. Um, Putting that aside, um, any any questions on how appeals work?
So what's the file you get? Is it like a zip file that you just email, or
It's
you're
a
not getting
zip
like a paper
file
file, right?
with Excel documents,
Okay.
with CSV documents. And unfortunately, let's see if I can find one.
Right, because then they just email that to the mail house, right? And then the mail house actually produces the letters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, apparently, I don't have any examples in a state that I can down. Oh wait, let's do this. There it is. That's probably what I'm needing. Here we go. Download your output files, get a small sample version that you can review, and then once done, output approved. So, see if I can get a copy. There we go. Output file, and then here are you get one file per file template that you used. If if basically two batches have the same template, but even if they're different, whatchamacallits, hold on. What's going on here? Hold on. My Excel is deciding to be a problematic person. What? Okay, that was empty. I don't know why that was empty. Try this one. Okay, this might be a terrible example. There we go. This is still bad, but this is a terribly put together one because it has no mailing information, but it's an horrible example of what a file might look like. And then these people here are my seeds. So theoretically, this file should have more in it. Someone apparently didn't make their file very well, their template, but it would have all the details that we had asked for. And then I would have a column that would tell me my scan lines, for example, my transcodes, so I could distinguish one set from another and what letter to use. And that would all be in the instructions to the mailing house. So put that aside for now, because that's mostly just operational details. And that's appeals.
No, they're super awesome.
Okay. I do want to point out in default reports, there, in addition to the piece about adding donations specific against the appeal as they come in, there are default reports, which is the appeal reports. I have not ever worked on these, so I don't personally know firsthand how they work. But the description should tell you. And these I believe were built by Intervare.
Do we have an example? I'm sorry. Do you have an example of a client other than Innovera that's using it?
Not at this time.
Okay.
How will we know we're dealing with Innovare? Are their tickets, is that their company name, or are they known by any other name?
We don't deal much with Innovare clients directly. If the organization name in Zendesk says Innovare, like Sarah Rowe, for example, there's 2 tickets in for her, that's Innovare.
Okay.
Most of the time, their team talks to our team directly, is my understanding. So we don't deal with them too often directly, but occasionally we will.